Beach, California. Johnny, you're on with Dr. Welsing.
Hey, Carl. Thanks for taking my call. How you doing, Dr. Welsing?
Hi, how are you?
Dr. Welsing, I'm coming from an ignorant standpoint, but I want to ask you a question about attitude. An attitude. If a person's attitude is indicative of racist, and they do things that a racist do, would it be far-fetched that they would be classified as a racist in their behavior, at least?
I'm sorry, now say that again.
Okay. If a person has an attitude that's indicative of racial animus, would you be able to perceive that person as being a racist? Or would it be far-fetched that they're not a racist, or just that? I mean, attitude to me means a lot. Okay,
now see, I don't use the term racist in the sense of name-calling a person.
Okay.
I said racism is a system for white genetic survival on the planet. So people who behave in such a way as to uphold that system would have to call themselves a white supremacist or a racist. The problem is that people want to play and use the word without defining what they're talking about. So I'm the only person who has a one-paragraph comprehensive definition of what racism is, and so people who practice the behaviors that are essential for white genetic survival. See, the logic of white genetic survival, as I said, it's like the brain computer of the person who classifies him or herself as white. If they want to remain white, then they are looking at black people consciously and or subconsciously, and particularly at black men, and saying he has the genetic material that can cause white genetic annihilation. I must create weapon can do same thing. That weapon is the gun. Effect. The black man in power effect. Because a black man in power, consciously or subconsciously, appears to be the threat to white genetic survival. So every person classifying him or herself as white has to go out and buy a gun.
Okay, Dr. Welsing, it was interesting. I was in a conversation with a white lady, and everything you're saying, she validated that. As a white woman, she told me, she says, I'm not a racist, but it scares her to know that if she were to interact, her grandchildren, or even if it interact with a black person, a black male, that her grandchildren would not look like her. And so everything you're saying, it was validated by a white person.
See, listen, goody.
But it's like she understands it, but just like you said, most white people don't get it.
Well, I would say that the majority of white people do understand.
Are they in denial?
Do you see, in other words, it's just like a football team playing against another football team. They don't lay out what their strategy and tactics for winning are to the other team. It's up to the other team to use their heads, their brains, and analyze, instead of begging for the other team to let them win. Okay. See, that's basically the position we're in. I mean, it's just like sitting down and playing chess, where the black side of the chessboard is playing defense, offense. The white side always plays offense, defense, because they always move first. So in a chess tournament, can the black side of the chessboard beg the white side of the chessboard to let them win, or is it up to the person who's playing the black side to be able to analyze what the game is all about first and foremost, and then what tactics and strategies are essential to win from the victim side, which is the black side that has to play defense, offense.
Okay, and I understand. Now I understand everything you're saying now. It took me a little while to get it, but I understand what you're saying now. It's not about them, it's about us.
Well, no, it's about, in other words, if you're looking at a football game, it's about both teams. or playing chess. It's about both sides of the chessboard. You see, but just like in football, the home team always wears white. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
You see, all of it is a part of the same design. And as long as we don't get it, and we don't get it because we have been programmed to hate ourselves.
All right, hold it right there, Doc, because we got to take another break.
Thanks for taking my call. I'm going to go. Thanks for taking my call.
All right,
Thank you.
800-450-7876. Speak to Dr. Welsing. We'll take your calls for in about 2.5 minutes. Let's go to line 3. KO's in D.C. KO, you're on with Dr. Welsing.
Hey, how you doing?
Fine, how are you?
Okay, sorry, Dr. Wells, I always say that you're the greatest mind science person to help us anyway. But listen, I was reading a book, and the book was written by a brother who's, I would say, they consider themselves a scholar of ancient Kemetic theory and thought processes, okay? As my words, I'll do like that. But in the book, I was reading it, and he says, well, while he agrees with you as far as the Caucasians trying to prevent genetic annihilation, but he believes that it is a lack of melanin that prevents them from having, I guess, spiritual ability, or ability to connect to spirit, or ability to connect to God or nature. What do you think?
Well, he probably read a paper that I wrote many years ago called Melanin, the Neurochemical Basis for Soul, S-O-U-L. So he doesn't agree with me. He's just probably reading from my paper.
Oh, okay. What do you think about the lack of melanin preventing these people from connecting to spirit or God or nature or whatever?
Well, see,
Lack of
melanin, the black pigment in our skin, the pigment in black is a superior absorber of energy. And
Right.
energy is information. Everything is energy.
Mm-hmm.
So the more energy you can take in, the more you have the capability of understanding more aspects of the environment. For example, all of the major religious persons have had melanin in their skin, whether it's Buddha or even Jesus. Somebody can write about Jesus as a black person and the whole issue of color in the Middle East during the time of the Romans, of the Roman Empire. I'm convinced that Jesus was a black person. But all of the people who have created religions have been skin pigmented people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So, again, I would just say that's an interesting area of study. But I wrote a paper many years ago, Melanin, the Neurochemical Basis for Soul, meaning that people who have pigmentation can bring in more energy. But let's say if they hate themselves, if they hate their black skin, then the brain is not going to be able to utilize that information. And I always refer to someone like George Washington Carver, who was a very black-skinned man, and they considered that he was a wizard because he said that they would say, how can you tell what plants can do? And he said he would go out in the early morning when it would be very quiet, and the plants would talk to him, meaning I translate that to mean that he was able to pick up the energy frequencies from plants and be able to translate what the plants were about and how the plants could be turned into other uses for the benefit of mankind. So there's several lessons in that, because the system of racism, white supremacy, has taught people to hate themselves based on the level of melanin pigmentation that they have. So everybody learns, all people of color all over the entire planet who have had contact with white people have learned, if you're black, get back, brown, stick around, yellow, mellow, white, right. Do you see? So the people who
Right.
have the greatest genetic potential to cause white genetic annihilation are pushed to the back of the line.
Well, I know I got to go. I want to throw this out. I hope it's all right if I speculate a little bit. I like to do that. I know it's wrong. I want to speculate on that. It seems to me that people that don't have melanin right now in the world, it seems to me they're dominating, I guess, pulling in energy or getting information from energy from non-living things. It seems to me that people like Joe Washington Conway, they were able to connect to energy from living things. And right now with the iPad, iPod, this, that, seems to me that this world, who's running it, who's in charge of, connected to non-living energy. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to comment on that,
Okay.
but people who classify themselves as white, that's why we can speak of racism, white supremacy as the dominant system on the planet, because now people who classify themselves as white are the dominant power force on the planet.
Right.
And they will continue to be so until the majority of non-white people wake up and start respecting themselves. You see, but under racism, white supremacy, all the non-white people have been programmed to hate themselves and want to be white. That's why skin bleaching creams and chemicals are a multi-billion-dollar business on this planet, where the majority of people, so it's all over the subcontinent of India, all over Asia, all over Africa, people of color have been taught to hate themselves and to want to be white. And interestingly, we're coming upon a holiday where the majority of people who say that they're Christians, and I personally baptized Baptist, christened AME. You see, all the people of color are given an image of God, unlike themselves, but given an image of God under white supremacy as white. And so all of the non-white people are worshiping a white God. You see, and so that has a lot to do with why the 9/10 global majority of non-white people are being able to be dominated and controlled to their detriment by the people who classify themselves as white, who have to kill and destroy in order to maintain their power.
All right. Thanks, K.O. Thanks for your call.
Thank you.
Right. Let's keep going. Let's go to line 4, see if we can reach Hamid again in Northern Virginia. Hamid?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Go ahead. You're on with Dr.
All
Welsing.
right. Well, Doctor, I've got to say that what you're saying is I most agree with it, and it's wonderful. And I love to share this type of information. I have a young child, a daughter who's 13 years old, and I see that the war, this race war, is what we're in, is really being carried out largely against our youth. When we have these grown men, like I'll name some, Jay-Z and Beyonce, if I'm not mistaken, they're 35, 40 years old, and they sit there and they spew off all these profanities and all this negativity, all day as a full-time job to our children. Even invited to the White House invited them in. They have the Beyonce singing the national anthem. So that's just one thing I'll put there. That this negativity and this position is being supported by the power structure, even from people who look like us.
Well, see, I say that I don't believe that they understand. In other words, I say the vast majority of black people do not understand racism. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. And so, therefore, they can be used by the system of racism, white supremacy, to pollute the environment and to pollute the minds of other black people. See, they simply don't understand. It's just like, the majority of people don't understand. I would say the majority of black people in this area of the world are still teaching their children that the highest level of black is ugly. Do you see what I'm saying? So we have to embrace ourselves and be able to face the truth of what has happened to us under the system of racism, white supremacy from the formal enslavement forward. We just have to embrace ourselves and say, well, wow, isn't this interesting? And we haven't understood at this level, but it's our responsibility and a reflection of our self-respect to begin to understand at a deeper level, not for the purpose of hating white people. We don't have time for that. We have to understand what it is and therefore how each and every one of us is going to conduct ourselves to begin to neutralize the system. That just means like playing effectively on the black side of the chessboard and neutralizing racism, white supremacy, and replacing it with a system of justice on this planet.
That's right. I couldn't agree with you more.
Hang on, because we got to take a break. And folks, get your questions ready. Put in a question form so the doctor can respond. 800-450. Staying with us and our guest, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. And of course, you know her from the ISIS papers. If you haven't read that book, I suggest you do. And just keep a copy in your library. It's one of those books, one of the books that you kind of like to keep. The number to call to speak to her is 800-450-7876. Please have your questions ready so she can respond. And let's go back to Ahmed. Ahmed, your question for Dr. Welsing.
All right, and this is a question / comment. Right? Doctor, I grew up pretty poor with a single parent household, just my mom, under some challenging circumstances. For a long time, I've been observing how things are going, particularly between white and black. I've been very observant of that. And I wonder, even then, in my youth, how some appear to have so much and others so little. And from my childlike eyes at the time, the dividing line was about race. That's how it looks when you're poor and black. And now as an adult, I feel that I'm in the middle class. I get to hold my own home. I deal with white people much more at work and in my community. And so I've learned some lessons, firsthand. And that is that I get to see this racism that you're speaking of, And I always wonder, I said, well, how is it so many people can have such a large conspiracy? I never see any hidden meetings. I never see people just congregating around in the street, like what they're going to do next. But it appears to be so well coordinated, So dealing with people personally, what I see now is that what white people do, and I don't hate anyone, but I'm just telling you facts as I see it.
Well, let me share this.
Best interests. They support their own interests.
Let's give her a chance to respond, because a lot of people want to speak to her. Thank you for your call.
Let me share this. A white female professor at American University said this to me after I was invited to speak at Lorton Prison a number of years ago. And I talked about racism at the prison. And she was a white professor, and she said to me, Dr. Welsing, I hate to admit it, but on all social occasions, when we as white people are together and there are no black people around, we are talking negatively about black people. She didn't say occasionally. She said on all social occasions. And she said the assumption is that everybody present is in agreement with this negative conversation about black people. And I told her that I understood why. And I wasn't angry with her because she was expressing the truth. I said, you're simply talking code about white genetic survival. And that means that you have to keep focusing on black people as a negative, as something that is negative, that can be killed and that can be destroyed. And many times white people will say to me, Dr. Welsing, how can I help solve this problem? And I said, simply tell black people what white people talk about when there's no black people around. And they always go silent because they are talking code. See, it's not Frances Welsing making up a system of white supremacy. For example, if I read further in this article that's in the Washington Post today, it says it is a shockingly large number talking about the exposure of black people to nitrogen dioxide. And it says you're talking you're taking what a major killer of people, you're taking, you're taking what a major killer of people in heart disease and increasing it slightly, and saying that nationwide, the difference in nitrogen dioxide exposure could account for about 7,000 deaths a year from heart disease in minority communities. Now, this is what's going on in this society. Every black person who is listening to this discussion needs to go out and buy the Washington Post or go online, and this should be the discussion when they're sitting down for dinner on Easter. Do you see a day that celebrates white bunny rabbits laying colored eggs, and also a chocolate bunny rabbit in the basket? See, we have to wake up and begin to understand the total symbolism and the total system, what it's all about and why it maintains itself. And we're not talking about hating white people. We're just talking about mastering and understanding of what is going on, because it has disastrous implications for the life and well-being of black people. But as I said, everybody ought to read this at the Easter dinner table. Every black family ought to read it and help the children sitting at the table understand.
All right, 800-450-7876. Line 5 is Fahim in Atlanta. Fahim, you're on with Dr. Welsing.
Peace to you, Dr. Welsing.
Same to you. Peace to you.
Thank you for your patience and the information you impart to us as a community. I have a comment and a question. First, the comment. There's a motion picture being promoted by T.D. Jakes about a little white boy that supposedly had a true vision of dying, near-death experience where he went to heaven and everything was white. And T.D. Jakes is out promoting it, and he was on a radio interview yesterday. So he was asked about black imagery in the Bible as Jesus is supposed to have appeared. He said that the imagery of Jesus is not important, only the message. And my question is this: when you hear Jay-Z saying negative things, you're ready for that because you know that he has no spirituality. But when you see a preacher on the level of T.D. Jakes saying that imagery in the society of where white supremacy is promoted in every aspect of our lives, that isn't important to us as a people, how do you combat that? Because our people go to these institutions and they trust this man to tell them the truth. How do you combat that? You think he's just ignorant of the fact, or he's deliberately misleading the community? Thank you.
Well, I would say that in both cases they're making tremendous amounts of money and being endorsed by the system of racism, white supremacy. Now, to what extent they understand and are knowledgeable about what they're doing and weighing that versus how much money I can make if I am making statements that are endorsing and in support of the system of racism, white supremacy. See, I would say that, people want to talk about being colorblind, and color doesn't mean anything, but if you look at the outfit they have on, they're all color coordinated, meaning that color is important when they go to dress up in the morning or when they put on their clothes, color is important. And also, we can go back to CNN and Anderson Cooper when he did the study on children and their perceptions of race and color, and where you have 3-year-old white children being able to instantaneously, if you show them a series of faces, the same face but different colors from white to black, and you ask a 3-year-old white child, what child is ugly, and the child without hesitation goes to black. Which one is bad? Goes to black. You know, which one do you not want to be friends with? The child instantly doesn't hesitate, 3 years of age, and points to black. And then when they show the same facial images and colors to a black child, and you say, which one is ugly? And the black child points to black. Which one is bad? Points to black. Do you see what I'm saying? So children, all of the children in the system of racism, white supremacy, are being systematically taught racism, white supremacy. The only reason that people want to be shocked and want to deny it or act incredulous is because they don't want to talk and face the reality of racism. They would rather deny and act as though it doesn't exist. I gave a paper in Toronto at the National Medical Association last July.
Hold on a second. I'll let you finish that on that paper. We're going to take a break for traffic. 800-450-7876. Speak to Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. We'll take your calls in 2.5 minutes. And thank you for staying with us and our guest, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing from the ISIS papers. Dr. Welsing, I'm going to let you finish up what you were saying about that meeting.
Okay, what I was saying was that I gave a paper at the National Medical Association Convention in July 2013 in section on psychiatry, saying that the denial of racism, white supremacy, is the #1 mental health problem in this entire country. The denial of racism. And again, I cannot say enough for the Washington Post putting this important article for people to see in all of its detail about race. Listen to this. Many urban highways, for instance, were originally routed through minority communities that were easier to uproot than middle-class white neighborhoods. Rumbling highways and landfills depress nearby property values, meaning that people who can afford to live elsewhere do. Those who can't afford to live elsewhere, meanwhile, are left to breathe in the consequences. Now, this is what anybody who reads this, I don't care whether they're white or black, anybody who reads this important article, I hope she gets a Pulitzer Prize, the author, Emily Badger, B-A-D-G-E-R, because she's trying to point out and tell the truth about the biggest, most important dynamic that is going on in this country and in this world, and it's racism, white supremacy. So it's not Francis Welsing cooking up something. No, this is reality, and it's causing the death of black people. Just the air pollution alone, 7,000 deaths of blacks and other minorities per year.
800-450-7876. Let's go over to the Poconos, at least the Pennsylvania side of the Poconos. Mr. Lee, you're on with Dr. Welsing.
Hey, how you doing? I got 3 questions, and the first question is, I think I've seen her on the Donahue show growing up, and back then she was taking a lot of heat on the stage, and I remember that. And I agree with your conclusion about racism and stuff like that, but these 2 questions I want to ask you, what do you think about this also? Does jealousy have something to do with it? Because as a white culture, this is not to be a racist or anything, they were the last on the scenes. And if you trace it back, like you throw a rock into the middle of the water and it ripples out, Africa was the first one, in my opinion, to, with Egypt and stuff like that, and it rippled out with Europe being the last. And the second question behind that is that after this takes hold and it's set in our ways, like a culture and everything with this racism, isn't the reason why they don't want to acknowledge it now is because for them to acknowledge it, then they have to go through guilt, that whole subconscious thing. So they have to, Obama is like this, it's a thorn on their side where, they gotta put us with the negative. It can never be a positive because they have to justify the behavior toward us. And the last question is about capitalism. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there. Isn't capitalism like a tool they can use to extend the life of racism, where instead of it being equal, where everybody can, like a social thing, capitalism they can use to keep us segregated and to control us and stuff like that?
Okay, let me just start with the last question, and Carl may have to repeat the other two. But you said capitalism. That I said the system of white supremacy, of racism, white supremacy, operates in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. So under economics, whether they call it, that's like dealing with the economic system as an abstraction, not as a part of the total system. So if they're just focusing on economics, then they can call it capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, socialism, communism. These are just different activities or labeling the activities within the total global system structure of racism, white supremacy. So, Carl, can you repeat the other two questions?
Jealousy and their justification for the actions and the history with the subconscious, meaning they're going to give us a negative image.
Well, I say that the jealousy, if you say jealousy, it's like people who classify themselves as white, where they would teach black people and people of color that they were ugly because they had skin color, but then would simultaneously take a chance of getting cancer to color their skin.
Exactly.
Do you see? So in other words, the jealousy is pointed out. It would be one thing if people had different shades of color and nobody was saying anybody was ugly. But when you have people who classify themselves as white telling the people who have skin coloration that they are ugly, but then they're secretly going to the tanning parlor and trying to get as dark as they dare, then that indicates that there is jealousy of the persons who have skin coloration. Because the absence of having skin color is a mutation to albinism from the basic black. Black is the norm for the human family. Do you see? And white is a mutation to albinism from the norm.
And the last question about the subconscious, because the reason why I bring up the subconscious, in order for them to come to a solution, they're never going to do that, because that would mean they have to recognize what they did in history. So they have to bring us, no matter what we do, put a negative image on it. And Obama's a prime example.
Well, I say the responsibility for change rests with black people and other people of color. When I say that racism, white supremacy is a system structured consciously and or subconsciously for white genetic survival. So if you structure a system for your genetic survival, you're not going to dismantle the system. The people who are victimized by the system have to be the ones who say, wait a minute, this is the highest level of terror, the highest level of injustice ever created on the planet, and we are going to transform it and replace it with a system of justice. Justice meaning no one is mistreated, no one is allowed to be mistreated, and those who need the most help get the most help.
Okay, I'll go with the last question.
That is to be done.
Can that be done without bloodshed? Can that be done without bloodshed? Okay, last question.
I'm sorry?
Can that be done without
I'll
bloodshed?
repeat the question for us. Doc, he wants to know if it can be done without bloodshed.
I'm sorry. Please repeat that.
Yeah, he says, can it be done without bloodshed?
I would say yes. In other words, the system of racism, white supremacy necessitates, for example, what we see happening on the continent of Africa, where you program people to fight and kill each other. They were just doing a big thing about the so-called genocide in Rwanda, where the Tutsi and the Hutu were programmed to fight and kill each other. And the weapons and everything that were given to them by people who classify themselves as white. And white people stood around and watched that massacre take place, just like what's happening in Nigeria and what's happening in other places on the continent, and what's happening in the urban centers. Black people do not manufacture any weapons on this planet. Nobody manufactures weapons. No black people. But somehow all these weapons are all over Africa and all over the inner city. So black people can kill each other. And so that's the kind of programming that takes place. And so if black people decide, if they begin to understand racism, white supremacy as a total system dynamic, and resurrect black self-respect, so that black people take the posture, no, we don't fight and kill each other. See, if the non-white people on the planet refuse to fight and kill each other, the system of white supremacy will collapse within 48 hours.
800-450-7876. Let's go to Hakeem in D.C. Hakeem, you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes. How you doing, Dr. Welsing?
How are you?
I'm doing fine. My question is, I saw a documentary by one of our great minds, Dr. Amos Wilson, who crossed over, and he talked about how people who are victims of abuse tend to identify with their abuser.
All right, hang on a second, Hakeem, because we're going to take a break, and I'll let you finish up your question for Dr. Welsing on the other side. Folks, get your questions ready. It's 800-450-7876. Take your calls in about 2.5 minutes. Radio. And thank you for staying with us and our guest, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Dr. Welsing, before you continue, can you tell us the title of the Post article again? People are online and asking for it.
Okay, the article is entitled, "Do We Really All Breathe the Same Air?" by Emily Badger. And the subtitle, "Minorities Are More Exposed to a Key Pollutant Than Whites Are, Study Finds." And this is on page A11 in today's Washington Post, Friday, April the 18th, 2014.
What section? Do you know what section? Are you still there?
Hello?
Yeah, what section of the Post?
It's the A section, page A11.
Okay. All right. Hakeem, you still with us? Can you make that question real quick for Dr. Welsing?
Yeah, sure. Like I was saying, I was watching a DVD by Dr. Amos Wilson. He was talking about how people who are victims of abuse tend to identify with their abuser, and I was wondering if you could, elaborate on that, on like the psychology of black people as a whole, as victims of abuse, and how, and how we, I guess, like the effects.
I would say one of the critical things that happens in the process of victimization is the demeaning of the self-image and the self-concept and the self-respect of the victim. So just like in formal slavery, where black people were called the N-word, I think people should say what it is. The N-word over and over and over again, and their humanity was being eroded and taken away. And so then the people start looking at themselves in the same way that their oppressors during formal slavery looked at them, and continuing to this day. I mean, if you want to see what the system of racism, white supremacy thinks of black people, all you have to do is turn on your television every day. And you see white, a black image, or a black commercial with a black man crowning and looking ridiculous. There's a commercial where a white woman hits a black man in the head on a V8 commercial. I mean, just ridiculous, and even the pushing of mixed race relationships on the television or in commercials is also a demeaning activity towards a particular group of people. And so the television is teaching black people to hate themselves up to this very moment, just like all of the books that children are exposed to and everything that they are, for the most part, exposed to. So it's an ongoing process. And then we wonder, well, how come black people learn to demean themselves? Well, they are being exposed to demeanment on a 24/7 basis, and this is why it's important to begin to understand the system dynamic of racism, white supremacy, so that people begin to look in depth at what they see and look in depth and understand, so that they are not just systematically being programmed to be and behave in a certain way that helps support the system itself.
All right, let's keep stepping. 800-450-7876. Let's go to Lawrence in Texas. Lawrence, you're on with Dr. Welsing.
Greetings, Dr. Welsing, Brother Carl.
Good evening.
Hey, Dr. Welsing. I got something that might be refreshing to you. Everything you said, sister, I'm 57 in a few weeks. I was taught everything you were saying. I was taught from the age of 11 by blacks in the black movement in Flint, Michigan, and Detroit. I was exposed to black teacher, black culture, black history way back in the 7th grade. And everything you said, and this is where I'm coming from. I want you to speak to me as a black man who's in total sync with what you're saying and knows what you're saying is to be true. How can I, as this black man who knows everything you're saying is true and who lives it, who's fighting it, how can I maintain my humility and my patience with my black people in the face of all this truth? Everything you say is truth, and I do not understand for the life of me why more people don't get it. And it's easier for me to accept the truth and the reality of life in America as a black man than for me to close my eyes and put a hood over my head and act like it don't exist. I go to sleep at night with a smile on my face. I wake up peaceful, ready for the next fight. But for the love of me, when I look at my college kids and they say, Daddy, you and Mama need to quit trying to help black people because they don't care, they gave up. And I find so much of what they say is true, but I don't tell them, yeah, I know it's true, because I don't want them to become discouraged. You know, I want them to continue to fight and to be proud black men and women. But I'm going to tell you, Dr. Welsing, as a black man, I need people like you and other black educators to tell me and other brothers and sisters like me who know what you're saying is true, who've lived it. How do we maintain our sanity? How do we maintain our humility and our patience with our black people when we know what the fight is about and we know how crucial it is for us to be positive black people and to stand up for each other and do the right thing, when all around us we see these black people selling out, hurting each other, hurting the cause? That's where I'm coming from, you know, because none you've ever said that I've heard is wrong and out of sync with reality. So my question is, if I get it, and I get it 40-some years ago, how is it that these people, these black people, men and women, coming up today? I talked to a 23-year-old sister yesterday. I said, you don't even identify with black people. This girl said, no, I'm Jamaican. I say, your parents are from the motherland just like mine are. Well, I don't have no patience with black people. You know, tell me that.
Let's see what, Lawrence. Let's give you a chance to respond because we're rolling up on a break. Thanks.
Well, I would say the system, in other words, racism, white supremacy is not fairyland. It's not pretense. This is a system structured consciously and or subconsciously for white genetic survival. So they are totally serious, working 24/7 to make certain that black people are indoctrinated and uneducated. And first and foremost, that they are taught to not love themselves as black people or to value themselves as black people. That's like when you turn on your television and you don't see positive, dark-skinned images of black people, but you can turn on some of these sitcoms and see people behaving in the worst way. That's where you have most of your dark-skinned black people buffooning and behaving like they don't have good sense. So the system is very sophisticated. It knows what it necessarily needs to do for white genetic survival. And it just happens that we as black people, we don't have the same programming apparatus. And so we have to depend on the African proverb, each one teach one. And then marvel at the idea that if I created a new dance step and we had Skype or something like that, and so I'll show you the new dance step. Black people have no problem passing the new dance step from New York to California in, 48 hours. Everybody is able to do the dance step because black people, in their oppression, are permitted to clown and sing and dance. And so we treat that with total seriousness. But at the same time, it's just like on the slave plantation. If a black person was talking about liberation, that person would be lucky if they escaped being alive. So anything that is serious and anything that is constructive for black people, this is not something that the system of racism, white supremacy promotes 24/7. And this is why black people have to understand. And I would just encourage you to deepen the love that you have for yourself. And it's just like if you've got children, so you know what it is to have a little baby who's not able to walk yet. You don't say, how come you're not walking? No, you take the little baby's hand and patiently and slowly help the baby take steps. And maybe the baby will cry. They don't want to take steps. They're not ready. But you hold the baby's hand and help the baby, guide the baby. Don't demean the baby. So I can understand the frustration. This is a deadly serious war against black people. But we have to value and love and respect ourselves so much that no matter what it takes, we have to be determined that the teaching and helping of our people begin to understand at a deeper level that this is what it is that we must understand, and this is what we must do.
Because we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2.5 minutes with Dr. Welsing. And thank you for staying with us, and I guess Dr. Francis Chris Welsing. And for those of you who wondering about that article, I posted it on Facebook, so you can check it out at carlnelsonshow.com. You can also like us on Facebook as well. Dr. Welsing, I'm going to let you finish up what you were saying before we take another call.
Drugs to one another. Stop black children from thinking that as children they can be adequate mothers and fathers. Black people need to be 30 years of age under the conditions of warfare, of racism, white supremacy, before they procreate. Use the time before that going to school and learning. Stop pretending that racism, white supremacy does not exist. Stop throwing down trash where black people live, work, and play. Stop allowing racism, white supremacy to divide black, brown, red, and yellow people.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Welsing. But how did they, why are we still locked into this system? You mentioned all these years we're still trying to appease white folks. Why? How do they still have that stranglehold?
No, because, see, the people who classify themselves as white are fewer than 1/10 of the people on the planet. But from the 15th century, when Columbus and they started circumnavigating the planet, and when they found out that the majority of the people on the planet were people of color, and the only white people were in the area that they called Europe, and the men had sex with the colored women, they found out that white would disappear. So they structured a system for their genetic survival. It's just logical. And to me, black people learn how to play chess, checkers, football, basketball, all of these games where you have to, what is the game about? What are the rules by which the game is played? And black people are expert at learning those games and the tactics and strategies that are used in order to win. But it's so difficult because when we look in that mirror and we see melanin and we see that pigment, we have been taught for hundreds of years to hate it. And we've got to admit it, we've got to face it, and we've got to go into reverse. And I'm saying that black people need to be saying, most black, most beautiful. All the colors are okay. But if it hadn't been for most black, we wouldn't have all the colors of the human family. And so we understand what has happened to us psychologically through understanding the system. See, understanding the system of racism, white supremacy, ought to be the highest priority of black intelligence on this entire planet. And so we can answer the Attorney General, Eric Holder, when he says, are we a nation of cowards? Being afraid and unable to talk about racism, we have to say, yes, Mr. Attorney General, you are absolutely right. We are a nation of cowards. But we are going to transform black cowardice by black self-respect. Black self-respect can annihilate being cowards. And so that's what we have to begin to engage in. We don't need to have other conferences and meet and eat and laugh and drink and talk. We've done enough of that. Now we need to increase our intellectual understanding of what it is that we're dealing with and be scientific. And no problem that is not defined, any problem that is not defined will not be solved.
Thanks, Dr. Welsing.
Thank you, Carl.